Welcome to Seeking the Lost with Earl Barnett. This program is sponsored by some area churches of Christ and is dedicated to spreading the everlasting gospel as revealed in the Holy Scriptures. The churches of Christ accept the Scriptures as totally inspired of God and the all-sufficient guide for faith and practice. Therefore, they reject all doctrines of men and rely totally on the Bible to direct their course in serving God. It is our pledge to you that each lesson will be the truth as revealed in His holy word. Mr. Barnett carefully prepares the graphics so you can clearly see the book, chapter, and verse of each lesson taught. We urge you to either copy the scriptures used or record this program for further study. If you have any questions or comments, or if you need prayer, the Seeking the Lost ministry can be reached toll-free at 1-800-390-7734. It is our prayer that Seeking the Lost will be an important source of information about God's Word and will help you more perfectly worship Him. And now, here is Mr. Barnett.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for tuning in to the Seeking the Lost broadcast. Today I have somewhat of a unique subject that I want to discuss with you, and it's simply a challenge to the God of the evolutionist. I don't know if you've ever done any research, but you can go on the internet and type in the origin of man or evolution, and you're going to get some of the most fantastic, some of the most far out explanations of life on the earth that you can't possibly believe. And I have never understood how that rational people can ascribe to evolution as being the answer to what life is here upon this earth. It is totally, absolutely amazing to me that, that people will ascribe to such a thing. And not only ascribe, but they will defend it. And if you bring religion in it and the idea of a creative God, then of course you're just an old stick in the mud. It is unbelievable. But I want you to think about this passage here. When David wrote, "I will praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are thy works, and that my soul knows very well." It just takes a person, just an old cornbread person that's never been to school, to understand that there is a creator. Somebody had to make this. And the Native Americans, they were separated from Europe and for all the cultures over there, from all the Bibles, but they believed in the Great Spirit. They believed that there was something more than them. And of course their intelligence was much higher than what we have today, that well-educated men, academically speaking, that they are in the dark about the origin of man, and they come up with some fantastic stories of how that it all developed. Of course, it began with Charles Darwin. But let's think about this. A challenge to the evolutionist God. What I'd like for the evolutionist God is to create a device, a cleansing device, to warm the air and remove dirt as it enters the lungs. That's one of the primary purposes of the nose. This device must send electrical impulses to the brain to be decoded as smell. Electrical impulses to the brain, must be decoded as smell. Plus, it must support the tongue in tasting and assist in the sound of the voice. I understand that the size of the nasal cavity has to do with the sound of your voice. And so my challenge is to the evolutionist God. And if you go to the internet and you try to do some research on the origin of the human nose, then you try to understand what they're saying and how that the nose developed from lower life, just parameciums, just small animals, microscopic animals, that they had some kind of an experience that caused them to begin developing a human nose. Something else I've always thought about, and how well that the human body works. And that is, what if the nose had evolved on your back between your shoulders? What if the eyes had come out on your toes? It just don't make sense. It can't make sense to the person, the rational person. Now here's another challenge. This one is really a biggie. And that is evolve, well, all of them are, the nose, the eyes, ears. Evolve a receiver that converts sound waves. Here are these sound waves, and they enter the ear. Sound waves that change these sound waves into electrical impulses again. Did you know that there is electricity in your body? That it travels over these nerves? That it travels from the ear, it travels to the brain. These electrical impulses, the sound waves enter the ear, it's changed into electrical impulses sent to the brain. And what does it do there? Well, the brain then identifies that as hearing. There's more to this. This device must produce wax for protection from water and infection, and include a conveyor belt cells to carry excess wax to the outside. I just recently learned about that. I had to go to an EMT specialist, and I was looking at the diagram of an ear, and I just asked a simple question. I said, how does earwax get out of the ear? And he said, well, it's got its own conveyor. A conveyor? Yeah, the ear has a conveyor. He said it's the only cells that grow laterally. But the cells inside this ear, that they grow laterally, and it's actually a belt line, a conveyor line that carries the excess wax outside the ear. Now, that's the first one that told me. I had to go back to an EMT specialist, and I confirmed it. I said, now, does the ear really and truly have a conveyor belt cells that quick? Yes. Doing research on the internet, then it is not uncommon to come up with the idea of a conveyor belt cells. Hey, I would like for the evolutionist God, I would like for them to develop such an organ that is capable of turning these sound waves into electrical impulses to be sent to the brain to be interpreted as hearing. Now you think about that. God had created the heavens and the earth, and he created mankind. And he didn't make mistakes with that. But just think about the conveyor belt. Where in the process of evolution did the blind, ignorant God of evolution decide that in order to clean out that ear, we're going to have to put a conveyor belt in there, conveyor cells? That don't make sense. It is an insult to God. But anyway, here's another challenge. A challenge for the evolutionist God. Evolve a camera. Of course, we understand that's the human eye. But evolve a camera that is so sensitive it can spot a candle flame flickering up to 30 miles away and distinguish 10 million different colors. What about that camera? Well, of course, it's the eye. The eye is like a camera. In other words, it is focusing near as I look at this screen, and it can look far as I look out into the studio. It can look here, and instantly it can look toward the moon and focus there instantly. What about that? It can recognize colors. It can recognize depth perception. All of these things. And someone will say, you sure they could see a flickering flame 30 miles away? If it was in total darkness, the eye is so sensitive that it could detect a flickering candle flame 30 miles away. It can distinguish 10 million different colors. This camera must take in light waves, change them into, here it goes again, electrical impulses, and send them to the brain so that we can see. Where did the God of evolution, who is non-existence, who has no knowledge, who has no power, I ask you that preach evolution, what about your God? Could he create such a thing as this? Oh, no, he couldn't create, but he can involve it. There is no single way. Oh, yeah, through natural selection and mutations. My friends, have you ever thought about mutations? If you study it just a little bit, if a cell mutates, that it brings death. It brings death. And the idea of a cell mutating and finally developing something like this right here, I just can't believe that educated people would even entertain the thought. What is it? Somebody had to make it. Somebody had to make it. If you see a huge plane, a 747, or maybe the latest one out, and you look at that plane, it is capable of flying above the clouds. If you looked into the cockpit, you would see instrument after instrument that is designed to keep that plane in the air. And if you look closely, you'll find all the telemetry that keeps that plane on course. Everything. Now you back off from that and tell me that over millions and billions of years, that thing came into existence. There's no way that I can believe that. There is no way. To believe in evolution is to believe in effect that a tornado tearing through a print shop would produce the Encyclopedia Britannica. Just think about that. How many times would that tornado have to tear through, or it would tear through a junkyard and create a 747? How many times would that have to happen? Somebody says, don't be foolish. I'm not. But the evolutionists are, and their God, while they in academia, they are insulted if you think that you can tell them that there is a creator God, that God in heaven made heavens and earth, made mankind, designed them to work, to function, and all that's in the earth. Well, they're insulted. Well, I'm insulted when somebody tries to get me to believe. Do you know, when I was in college, not many years ago, I had a professor that said that the eyeball began when an amphibian animal crawled out of the water and into the sunlight, and there was a blister bubble that came up. And over millions and millions and billions of years, that blister bubble finally became an eyeball. You know, can you believe that? Well, doing research, I found that very statement, that people still teach that this has happened. And then others say that, on these tiny microscopic animals, there was a light-sensitive cell that developed, and that became an eyeball. Mankind came from these tiny little microscopic animals. That's what to teach. That is the evolutionist God. Think about this camera, and you ask yourself, can I believe that it evolved, or was it designed and created? That's what I believe. Now then, for the evolutionists, evolve a pump for the movement of blood throughout the body. This pump must beat about 115,000 times per day. It must cycle over 100,000 times a day and be strong enough to beat about 42 million times per year. Talking about that pump, talking about the heart. It must be durable enough to pump for at least 100 years or maybe even more. I met a man the other day that he said, I just celebrated my 97th birthday. That heart that began beating in the mother's womb is still going. It is still cycling. Did that evolve? What about the intricate system of arteries and veins and capillaries that carry food and oxygen to every cell in the body? What about that? Did that just happen? Did that evolve over millions and billions of years? Don't you believe it? Don't you believe it? You don't have to bow to the evolutionist God. Now then, a challenge for the evolutionist God, this is a good one too. Evolve an organ capable of pulling oxygen from the air, moving it to the blood flowing in its walls. This structure must serve as a loading dock for oxygen and an unloading dock for carbon dioxide. Now I know that this is in cornbread language. That's the only language I understand. But as I breathe in, my lungs make it possible for the blood flowing in my lungs to pick up the oxygen which it will carry to every cell in the body. And it also this lung also gets the garbage and brings the garbage back, and the lungs take it out and breathe it out as carbon dioxide. You mean to tell me that the lungs are capable of doing that? That's what they do. And that's what they were designed to do. Just think about it. Do you have to bow to the God of the atheist, to the evolutionist? Do you have to scatter your brain? Do you have to deny all reasoning? Well, many people do. Here's the biggie. Here's a challenge for the evolutionist God. Evolve a computer weighing about 3 pounds. That's what the brain weighs, and it weighs about 3 pounds, made up of blood and neurons and whatever. That it will be the command center for the human nervous system, for everything. Did you know you see with your brain? Do you know you hear with your brain? You taste with your brain? The sensory organs send the signal the brain interprets. It will control motor function, balance. It'll have the capability to interpret information sent to its hard drive by the eyes and by the ears and all of the sensory organs. Somebody said, you saying the brain is a computer? I'm using that as an illustration. You know, this is the way I tell people and inform them that they have a soul. I can prove to you right now you have a soul. And somebody said, well, let's just see. I hope some evolutionists are listening. Okay, I want you to think right now of your wife's name or your girlfriend or your mother or your father or any name that you've ever had. I want you to think of it. Well, of course, you know that you begin a search. You know, computers are able to store knowledge. It's able to search. And so you say, I'm thinking. Well, that's right. Usually, if you're seated at a keyboard, you type in keywords like these names I mentioned, and you hit enter, and the computer, if that knowledge is in there, it brings it up. It'll search for it. That's true. Here's what I ask you. In the brain, thinking of it as a computer, and ask you to think of those names, who's at the keyboard? What? The brain, if you take it out and look at it, it weighs about 3 pounds and has been studied over and over and over again. But who's at the keyboard? What is at the keyboard that tells your brain to search the names of your wife, your girlfriend, your parents, the names of your children, or any other thing that might be in that memory. Who's at the keyboard? Your soul. There's difference between the physical body and the spiritual body. And if anybody can't see that, that's just a simple illustration. And I'm sure that you could take it much further if you thought about it. But who's at the keyboard that tells this, if you want to call it a computer, to search for those names? Who's at the keyboard? You have a soul. Now then, a challenge for the evolutionist God, further specifications for this computer: the ability to store and retrieve facts, the ability to provide consciousness and awareness of present surroundings. You know, people, they get to look and say, what is consciousness? Well, somebody say, that's when you're awake or whatever. But what is consciousness? What makes it happen? The evolutionist God can't answer that. The ability to generate love, any emotion, hate, sadness, happiness, and fear, or any other emotion that you can imagine. A computer that we buy at the store can't do these things. But the human mind can. There's a difference, aren't there, between the human brain and the human mind? There's a difference between a body and the soul, that part of the human body that's directing this great computer filled with knowledge and experiences. A challenge for the evolutionist God. They've already struck out, and you know it. Materials provided to the God of evolution, nothing. I'm going to give them nothing. Nothing. If I have nothing in my hand, I can wait billions and billions and billions of years, and I still have nothing. Nothing comes from nothing. That's just it. So the evolutionist God, your materials are nothing. You've got to bring it up from nothing. To prove the God of the evolutionist is a false God, let's allow this God to have access to all the materials and knowledge of the universe and ask it to produce just one living cell. Just one. Can't do it. Can't do it. Reminds us of Elijah and the god Baal. You remember this story. It's an Old Testament story. You know, the people of God had gone off into idolatry. They're going to pay for it. They're going to be carried away in captivity. But there was this prophet by the name of Elijah. And he told those, or asked those people, how long do you falter between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal, follow him. But the people answered him not a word. Right now you have people that are afraid to speak their minds because of the ridicule that they would receive from so-called well-educated people if they would suggest that there is a creator, that God did it all. In other words, if the evolutionist is God, or God is God, follow him. But if not, follow the Lord. Well, he made a proposal. He said, y'all take your sacrifice, you take a bull, cut him up, burn him, put him on an altar. I'm alone, I'll do mine. It'll take me longer. You call on the name of your gods, and I'll call on the name of the Lord. And the God who answers by fire, he is God. And the people woke up. You know, that was their way out. They didn't really have to take sides. You ever met people like that? They said, that's a good idea. That is a good idea. They took the bull which was given them, they prepared it and called on the name of Baal from morning even until noon, saying, "Oh, Baal, hear us." One of the most sad statements, I think, that's found in the entire scripture for me. But there was no voice. No one answered. the evolutionist God, there is no voice. No one will answer, and yet people bow down before its altar. There is none to answer. And these people, of course, just find out about it. It was noon and Elijah mocked him. I've always enjoyed reading this. Oh, he said, hey, cry aloud, for he is a God. Either he is meditating, or he is busy. You've got to get his attention. Or he is on a journey. You've got to get him back here. Or perhaps he's sleeping and must be awakened. Now, these people are already in a frenzy. And when he gouged them like this and when he teased them like this, they went absolute crazy. They jumped on this altar, then they cut themselves. Their altar broke it down, hooping and hollering. None answered. And they cried aloud and they cut themselves after their manner with knives and lancets, bleeding everywhere, trying to get their God to he can't answer, and not coming back, and not coming. Well, of course, Elijah prayed to God, and this is what happened. The fire of the Lord fell, consumed the burnt sacrifice, and the wood and the stones and the dust, and it licked up the water that was in the trench. He had them to pour 12 barrels of water on the sacrifice, dig a trench around it so it'd hold the water. I want you to notice the order of this burning. It's in reverse order. Consume the burnt sacrifice, that's lit on top of the wood. And then the wood. And then the stones that it made the altar with. And then the dust. And licked up the water that was in the streets. Fire really came down from heaven. Well, everybody said, well, the Lord, he is God. How much evidence do we need today to say the Lord, he is God? The prophets of Baal did not survive the day. Do not let one of them escape. They seized them. Elijah brought them down to the brook Kishon and killed every one of them. The prophets of the evolution, the God of the evolution worshipers will not survive the day of judgment. The scriptures say, but in accordance with your hardness, you impenitent heart, you're treasuring up for yourselves wrath in the day of wrath and the revelation of the righteous judgment of God, who will render to each one according to his deeds. That's just the way it's going to be. Time is gone. This is Earl Barnett saying, have a good day.
Our God is an awesome God.
You have been watching Seeking the Lost with Earl Barnett. If you need prayer or have comments or questions, feel free to call the Seeking the Lost Ministry at 1-800-390-7734. That's toll free, 1-800-390-7734. Seeking the Lost is sponsored each week by some area churches of Christ.